So there I was, diligently beavering away in a vain attempt to try and keep up with a flood of orders coming in on the website, which is great, don't get me wrong, love it to bits and long may it continue. And if it does, we may well be able to migrate from Tesco blue stripe beans up to the odd tin of spam. Who knows? World's our oyster. Anyway, so I'm making up another board, cutting the handles, doing the corners, and then I'm going to reach for my same old corded router when it strikes me. Light bulb moment. I bought a battery powered router. And here are the two routers that I bought. I know I referred to one earlier on, but I ended up buying two. So why two? There's a very good reason for that, and a point that I want to make, that it's really difficult to just buy the piece of kit that you want. You're buying into a system, even more so when you're buying a battery powered tool. And you can't afford, in my opinion, to just look at the tool that you want now. You've got to look at the range that the manufacturer offers and the suitability of that range, tools, batteries, the whole kit and caboodle for your needs. So when you're watching this, you've got to bear that in mind. The type of work I want these to do may not be the same as the type of work you want them to do. So please take that into account as you're watching this, and also bear in mind everything said in this video is nothing more than my opinion based on my needs and my experiences. So that being said, let's see what we get for our money. First thing I noticed is that the material that the two boxes are made of, the DeWalt feels far more substantial. The Milwaukee feels a bit cheap and plasticky. Not that that's going to affect me and what I'm going to be doing with them, but as mentioned, an observation. So that's the contents of both boxes laid out the bench so we can see and make a direct comparison as to what we get for our money. Starting with the Milwaukee, we've got the parallel fence for the plunge base. Plunge base itself, a replacement base for the plunge base, but it's also got the holes on it to fit the fixed base. And they definitely line up, so you can use that as an extended oversized base for the fixed base. The fixed base also comes with the parallel fence, the motor unit itself, and with the Milwaukee kit, I bought the battery charger and the batteries because I didn't have them. Over to the DeWalt, we've got the parallel fence for the plunge base itself, a fixed base, parallel fence for the fixed base. We've got another slightly larger base that will fit onto the plunge base. The plunge base on the DeWalt ships with this, I don't know what you call that, what shape that is, but square one side, round the other, whereas the Milwaukee is just a round base. The Milwaukee has got dust extraction pre-fitted onto the plunge and the fixed base. With the DeWalt, you decide whether you want to fit them yourselves. I've no idea whether either one of those are going to fit my extractors or not yet. Both of them come with a set of tools. So both kits ship with both a 6mm collet and an 8mm collet. Okay, that information about the collet sizes I just said was wrong. The Milwaukee, these two silver collets, ships with a 6mm and a 6.35. The DeWalt, the black collet, ships with a 6.35 and an 8mm. The DeWalt ships with a centering tool so that you can make sure it's perfectly aligned for template work, and it ships with quite a flimsy but nonetheless a template guide, whereas the Milwaukee doesn't. On the DeWalt, I already owned the battery charger and two batteries that came with the battery powered nail guns that I use, the first fix and second fix guns. On the Milwaukee, I had to buy the charger and the batteries as well. I'll put the costs and the links to the places that I bought these down in the description so you can have a look. Nothing to do with me, just the cheapest place that I could find them. So both bases are very similar size and very similar construction. They both feel like they're made out of very reasonable material. The DeWalt's quite a rough finish and the Milwaukee's rather smooth in this very attractive gunmetal colour. Not that makes any difference. Both use the same sort of locking mechanism. The big standout for me is the different handles. The DeWalt is just a couple of plastic lumps, rubber lumps on the edge, whereas the Milwaukee, they've actually shaped them and they feel rather pleasant to hold. Both have got adjustable depth stops on them. The DeWalt uses the historical round and the Milwaukee's got a little square bar in it. They've both got a little fine adjuster here at the bottom which you can turn. Feels like there's a little O-ring in there to stop it moving when the router's running and vibrating. Milwaukee's very stiff to turn and the DeWalt's very loose to turn. Not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Looking at the turret at the bottom, the DeWalt's got 5 steps and the Milwaukee's got 6, but the DeWalt's got this adjustable depth stop here. The plunge locking mechanism on both is the default to lock, so you've got to push down against the spring to move it and then release to lock it. Same with the Milwaukee. So now let's try and fit the dust extraction back in again. And the Milwaukee uses a bar that threads through into the space or the locking mechanism that you'd use for the fence and then lock it down 𝑨𝒐𝒊𝒏𝒔𝒕𝒆. The DeWalt has this affair which you pop in and then there's a little hole there to put in one of these screws. So let's pop that in there. The springs do make it a little fiddly. I'm not sure which type I prefer, the 2-wing or the 3-wing. So let's answer the question of whether the dust extraction port fits the hose or vice versa. So although that feels like it fits, it actually doesn't. It'll go over that inner section, but it won't go inside the outer section. So that's going to need an adapter. And they're kind of exactly the same size, so that's going to need an adapter. That one will be easy to 3D print. This one could be slightly more of a challenge, although we could print over there and step down to there. So that'll be easily overcome on both. As for inserting the router, with the plunge base, the DeWalt has to go that way round. Otherwise, with the switch on-off switch being there, if you go that way round, you can't get to it. And then drop it in until it hits this stop here at the bottom. Lock it in place and you're good to go. The Milwaukee will only go in one way because of this raised section at the top here with a fine adjuster that engages in the fixed base. But once again, drop it in until it hits the stop, lock it off, and you're good to go. Bit changes on both routers can be performed with the motor either in or out of the fixed base. The DeWalt is very easy to access, the locking button. The Milwaukee, a little bit tighter, but you can definitely still get to it. Now let's have a look at the parallel fences. The Milwaukee ships with the parallel fence assembled. The DeWalt you've got to put together yourself. And again, you've got to fanny around with these bolts and springs, which I'm really starting to dislike already. I can see me losing the springs very quickly. Interestingly, the Milwaukee ships with a little fine adjuster for the fence. The DeWalt doesn't. So the DeWalt slips in like so, and there's 2 holes there to enable you to lock the fence in place. The Milwaukee slips in and locks off with the 2 nuts at the back. Moving on to the fixed bases, then the clasps are exactly the same between the 2, but inserting them is really quite different. On the DeWalt, the fine adjuster, that's a contradiction in terms, is this ring. So the first thing you've got to do is wind this ring onto the shaft of the motor, and sometimes it goes on perfectly. There we go. And that's your depth stop. And then you slide the router in. There's a little pin inside that you've got to line this channel up with. Simply slip the router in, give it a push so it engages. You'll hear it snap, and then you can adjust the height with this collar. It does work. It's a little coarse when you want to get to that very fine bit, but I've used it for years and got on with it quite well. So no issues with that. So moving on to the Milwaukee. The Milwaukee will only sit in the fixed base one way because of this raised section which houses the fine adjuster. Now, in order to slip this in, you've got to push this button in, which moves the fine adjuster locking mechanism out the way. Pop it in until it hits the bottom, let that go, and again, you can lock it in place. So to adjust the router using the fine adjuster, make sure it's unlocked, and then you can wind it into exactly the position you need. Lock it off and you're good to go. The Milwaukee is a slightly smaller shaft on the motor, which feels better in my hand. I don't know the biggest hands in the world, but in saying that, that's not overly sized. I prefer that. So let's look at the dust extraction. The ports are exactly the same size, so they're not going to fit the Festool. This is a little fiddly, I find. There's a little plastic lug here which has got to fit into this socket, and then the tiniest of little screws to lock that in place, and you're away. On the DeWalt, these screws are actually already fitted to the plastic housing, but without any springs, so you've got to pop them in place and then wind them down. They're both a little fiddly, I've got to be honest. That one in particular, because the assembly itself is in the way, so you've just got to persevere to wind them in. In everyday usage, if I had to take them on and off, I would find them very annoying. On to the parallel fence that comes with the fixed base. The Milwaukee, again, bit of pressed steel, if that's the right term, and we've got this locking knob at the back that slides up into that section behind the knob, and you lock it off. Not the most secure fixing in the world, but rather a small fence, so there's not a lot of purchase there to get a lot of turning action on it. The DeWalt slides into this little slot here up to the stop, and then there's a couple of screws that you pop in through the bottom there. Again, I think that's going to be a little bit fiddly. Neither one of them are an exceptional fit. and I really don't like the look of either, to the point where I'd rather not use them. I think I'd try and find a solution with a bearing guided bit if I could. So the first job I'm gonna try is a little top bearing template guided bit in the Milwaukee, because I've got a curve to put on the end of a board, and I thought I'd try this instead of using the corded router which I usually use. Pretty representative of the type of jobs I'm going to use these routers for. Pop the battery in, nice and firm. It's not that bad a weight, it is a bit of a lump. So slow start and brake stop, I quite like that. Out of interest, let's see how far down the DeWalt will go, whether I could get any more depth. So that's maximum plunge on the DeWalt, and I don't think that's gonna be any different at all. So to finish this off, I'm gonna have to pop it in the router table, which doesn't really surprise me. That's a hell of an ask of a palm router, 40mm. So the next little job I'm gonna try, again, this is gonna be the primary use for these routers for me, is putting a tiny little roundover around this board. And now we'll see just what this fine adjuster is like. Bit of waste MDF here so that I can get the depth set. Try that. One thing I'm noticing already, even after this short period of time using the Milwaukee, is the difference in base size. I miss this extra section, so I may well change the base on the fixed base to the larger ring that they sent with it. So after a couple of hours working with these two, I'm already developing likes and dislikes. I really like the size and the feel of the Milwaukee. It suits my hand, but really personal. But I really like the extra power that the DeWalt's got. This doesn't seem to bog down at all, whereas this did a couple of times. I really prefer the fine adjuster on the Milwaukee, but I really like this base on the DeWalt. So there's no clear winner yet. There's bits of each that I prefer. But this one's kind of got the edge a little bit because of the extra power. It makes it that little bit more versatile. Anyway, on to the plunge base. So to test the plunge base, I've got a scrap bit of ply here. And that pencil line there is the place where I want to put my cut to. I've got bowl and tray bit in the router. I'll use this fine adjuster, which works surprisingly well. Little locking knob underneath, and we'll use the depth gauge, and then we'll shoot for 2mm. A real quick and simple test, I'll grant you. However, that fine adjuster, as crude as it looks, works really, really well. The fence is more than big enough. It's really smooth, and the plunge base itself with those handles and the locking mechanism right there works really well. Really pleased with that. So I'll swap that over for the DeWalt. Interesting point to note there, the orientation of the base, the pillars on the Milwaukee, they're right in my way to look at the bit. On the DeWalt, the pillars are the other way, level with me if you like, so I've got clearer access to the bit and I can see exactly where I want to position it. So let's set the depth stop again, 0. And we'll come up 2 mil. Make sure we're all tightened down. Well, I'm sorry to say there's still nothing between them, or delighted to say, not sure. The handles that I made such a point of mentioning on the Milwaukee are really, really comfortable, but these aren't uncomfortable. They're just not as pleasant as those, but they're more than adequate to do the job. Both bases run really smoothly. Both fences feel the appropriate size for the router. The depth stop, really easy to use. The turrets are both really easy to use. There's still nothing between them, in my opinion, so far. But these have been really small tests for such a versatile tool as a palm router. I've got to say that I'm really surprised by the amount of power in each and the way the batteries are lasting. Neither one of them has dropped a bar on the battery yet, so that's a surprise. And the amount of power they can both deliver from a battery is also a surprise for me. So at the moment, I'm equally delighted with both of them, but I really need to use them now for an extended period of time, which is exactly what I'm going to do. So that's it for this comparison video. At the moment, I'd say they're both equally capable, almost identically priced and identically equipped, spec'd, accessorized, whatever the appropriate term is. And I'd be really happy if I bought either one of them and didn't have the other to compare it against. But like I say, time will tell. Give me 3, 4, 5 months working with them in the workshop every day, and I'll come back to you and do another summary. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope it's been of some benefit to you. If you did, if it had, thumbs up, subscribe, yada, yada, yada. You know the routine. Hope to see you next time. Ta-ra.